Stories, they help to form and express identity. They can create a people, a place and a history. Conversely, denying identity is the destruction of a community story. A significant part of my professional work has been in the field of narrative in Palestine. In Holland, I was involved in studies how Palestine has been negated an identity through the destruction of its story in Western discourse, especially in popular literature. In Palestine, I have been working with educational organizations aimed at the construction of the national identity through story. Let me tell you two personal experiences that motivated me to explore the latter part. My daughter goes to a school in Bethlehem and follows the Palestinian curriculum. When she was 7 years old, a couple of years ago, it happened that she had to study a chapter in civics about the Palestinian refugee camps. She learned the names of the camps in Gaza, West Bank, and the Arab countries by rote. But when I asked her whether she knew what refugees were, she said she didn't. At least until that moment, she did not know about the story of the refugees and the camps and where the refugees come from. She learned about the central Palestinian concept of the refugee camp, even as simple you can say, without its story. I was surprised and arranged a meeting with her civics teacher, who expressed his own dissatisfaction with the curriculum. This story motivated me to go further into the issue, and together with others who were already active in that field. My organization is right now working with the YMCA and with Etija from the Galilee on the issue of public advocacy regarding the representation of Palestine in the Palestinian and also the Israeli curriculum. The second story is about a school-based oral history project from a few years ago, in which I had the good luck to cooperate. At Mar Youssef in Bethlehem, female students of 16, 17 years old, encouraged by their English teacher, interviewed older persons in their family and community and wrote their personal stories. One student interviewed her grandfather, whom she had never asked before about his experiences during the British Mandate time and the 48 War. She was mesmerized by his story of courage and strength in coping with the hard circumstances at the time. When her grandpa soon died afterwards, she felt that this interview was a way of restoring her lost contact with him. By listening to his story, she was in fact able to say goodbye, almost at the moment of his death. Incidentally, after this oral history project, the Mar Youssef teacher continued with the diary writing project up until this very day. Narrating is connecting. The teacher involved in this oral history project called this process of connecting the golden chain of stories. Connecting this history, with memories of place and community, is similar to what the Dutch historian Johan Huizinga called the experience of feeling a historical sensation. Often unexpectedly, through an eye-opening event like talking with an older family member, you feel that you become part of a history and you start to identify with it, even to be inspired by it. You feel that this history becomes your own. The words are not dead as in rote learning, they become alive and one's feelings resonate with the experiences of a community. To emphasize this element of connectedness, the book coming out of the girls' oral history was called Your Stories Are My Stories. Which stories help to evoke this historical sensation or resonance? My assumption is that to a large extent it is about bringing back the human element. Stories about daily life are especially helpful. It is the daily life setting which connects. After all, the daily human concerns and values are to a large extent shared all around the world. Most of us deal with the concerns of sharing or raising a family, and we struggle to preserve the values of education, work or health. When we talk about connecting this history, place and community, I think it is about bringing back this daily life perspective. extraordinary achievements within a daily life context are particularly inspiring. When you notice common people showing outstanding human qualities in ordinary life in the face of extraordinary demands and constraints, you cannot help but to feel connected. This, I think, connects a person with stories around the world. It connects one with the larger human story and community. But to connect with your national community, you need to establish resonance with the stories of your national community. And how does that happen? In the case of Palestine, not any story from Palestinian daily life is likely to create a specifically Palestinian resonance. We should have to look to daily life stories which somehow point to central Palestinian experiences that are part of the collective memory and that evoke a feeling of national identity. The symbol of sumud epitomizes, I think, such a central experience based on Palestinian stories in which common people show these extraordinary qualities while facing difficult demands in daily life. This symbol I wish to explore a little in the rest of this paper. Sumud has a double meaning, which is clear from its English equivalent, steadfastness. On the one hand, it relates to a vertical dimension, standing strong on the land, having deep roots. On the other hand, it indicates a horizontal time dimension, an attitude of patience and perseverance, of not giving up. Why does sumud centrally resonate the Palestinian experience? Sumud is an assertion opposing the denial of Palestine. The denial of Palestine has of course been a central Palestinian experience. There has been no time when Palestine or the Palestinian identity was not at risk. In opposition to the Zionist image of Palestine as a land without a native people, an image which aims at denying the Palestinian narrative, sumud asserts, I'm a Palestinian and this is my land. It's an assertion of the core cause and an assertion that this cause will not disappear. The symbol of sumud has been subject to various discussions and also criticisms. Historically, there's the question whether it relates to a particular stage of community building in advance of and preparation for the resistance of the First Intifada. Alternatively, it is seen as a feature that characterized Palestinian history throughout. Originally, sumud was the name given to a fund in Amman assigned to help keeping Palestinians in Palestine. And given this origin, there has been a discussion whether sumud is a top-down concept or whether it can be employed as a source of inspiration for community building from below. Another discussion relates to whether sumud is a form of resistance. The concepts of struggling or active sumud have been developed to emphasize the resisting element and to suggest that sumud should be understood in a dynamic and active manner. Still, another discussion relates to the shortcoming of national symbols in general. It's about the tendency of symbols to become frozen, to lose their human story-like meaning, and to become part of political discourse divorced from reality on the ground. When we consider sumud as a story concept and not just as a static identity symbol, we can avoid some of these last problems and show its potential for a pedagogy of national identity. In the following, I will briefly go on 4 aspects of sumud which relate to its potential to raise a pedagogically relevant perspective. Its democratic or participative character, the agency or willpower and hope it demonstrates, the aesthetic perspective, and the possibility of connecting sumud with wider human values. Raja Schade's diary, The Third Way, dating back to the early 1980s, explained the story of sumud as one of courageous citizenship in which, in principle, all Palestinians can participate, not just in the political field, but in all aspects of life. The spirit of sumud is expressed in the typical stories of people related to their will not to leave their land or lands. For instance, the family rebuilding their home again after each new demolition, the peasant who continues to cultivate his land in the face of expanding settlements, the family going on with life despite being surrounded by the wall on all sides, and so on. A strong commitment is not just expressed by staying on the land, or in your house, but also by the will to continue with one's daily life. Sumud is going on this life, study and work despite hours of checkpoint waiting. Another way of classifying sumud stories is according to the kind of human willpower that sumud demonstrates, the kind of extraordinary human quality that challenges adversities. For instance, it can be about preserving the ability to dream and to imagine another reality when you live in a black tunnel. Or it can be about maintaining the ability to joke under the most serious and heavy of circumstances. It can be about longing and looking for beauty when faced by the ugliness of the wall and other barriers, or about keeping a human view of your adversary when you're yourself being dehumanized. Or it can be about taking the initiative when there seems to be no choice. From a pedagogical point of view, the bringing out and collecting of such stories is a rewarding enterprise, not just in terms of learning how to interview or write such stories, but especially because they help to connect with people and communities. Sumud stands for the spirit and energy to make a choice even though one stands with the back against the wall. The choice is both positive and negative. Positive as for the assertion that one keeps going on with keeping going on. Negative as for the refusal to resign to humiliation. Both add to a sense of achievement. Sumud is perhaps not liberation, but it's definitely an achievement at a personal and collective level. And there's an important pedagogical issue at stake here. It is a truism that education is about hope. Hope, not an easy optimism, but a hard-won awareness that there is always, even in the face of the most extreme adversity, a human perspective. To bring back achievement stories, with their support for self-appreciation and pride, is by itself an educational achievement. To identify, to develop and communicate sumud requires an aesthetic sense. Communicating is also an art. Sumud has been expressed in symbolic paintings, in poetics, in literary stories, or graphics of the land and its community, such as in the form of the image of the olive tree with its roots deep in the land and branches reaching out to the sky. Part of the educational challenge here is to build skills and to identify genres in which an artistic sense of sumud can be conveyed, showing the beauty of a moral spirit that at the same time is affected by suffering and loss. In my organization's experience with school and university youth in the Bethlehem area, the problem is not so much of an artistic lack of feeling and telling or even writing talents. It's rather the difficulty for many youth and people to discover the extraordinariness of their own or families or community stories. They feel they have nothing special to tell, as if the subject of telling about daily life in Palestine is not worth for others to know about, because everybody already knows it. The trick for teachers and trainers and others working with youth is, I think, looking at reality as if you see it for the first time. To create this sense of wonder, and in the Palestinian context, also of fresh anger, needed to see the impossibility of life here and its injustices, but at the same time discovering people's spirit of refusal and resistance. Discover what you know, said Paulo Freire, the Brazilian pedagogue. For resonance with your own community stories, you sometimes need to take a step back, a different perspective, and here a heightened sense of aesthetics and the identifying of new ways of expression and communication can help. Because of its deeply human quality, sumud resonates also wider than the Palestinian community. Showing inner strengths under extreme adversities is a universal phenomenon. The stories of sumud are in fact good to share with people and youth abroad, who often hold deep stereotypes of Palestinians as either terrorists or powerless victims. They give a different dimension to understanding the Palestinian experience. Let me give you, as a way of ending the talk, another personal story which illustrates this and which connects stories from Holland and Palestine. When I worked at the Palestine Committee in Amsterdam some 20 years ago, I used to pass daily along the Anne Frank house, watching the queues of international tourists there. At that time, I did not relate to Anne Frank much. I never felt a historical sensation, even though Anne Frank's story is considered to be, to some extent, constitutive of the Dutch psyche. You may know about Anne Frank's story of Sumud. As a Jewish girl, she was locked up during the Second World War in a room at one of the Amsterdam canal houses. She wrote her diary until she and her family were caught and killed in the concentration camps. Her diary writing was an act of sumud. For me, Anne Frank's story became alive when the diary project at Mar Youssef started. Teenager girls of the age of Anne Frank participated. In preparation for the diary project, the girls learned about girls' diaries from other contexts, such as Sarajevo during the civil war in former Yugoslavia, or from an Indian teenage girl in the 19th century. When they first read from Anne Frank's story, they rolled their eyes, according to the teacher. The Second World War and the occupation of Holland by the Germans was not a setting to which they easily could relate, or desired to relate. But after a while they started to identify with Anne Frank, not in the least because they could understand Anne's predicament of being closed up in a room. After all, curfews have been a familiar phenomenon in Palestine. After a while, the interest in Anne Frank's diary grew. The teacher asked to bring more books of Anne Frank in English. As a reliable courier, I brought books from the Stamatsky bookshop in Jerusalem to Bethlehem. As an international, I of course did not face problems of traveling from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. The teacher said that even from the distant Ta'amre area to the east of Bethlehem, there were some parents interested in reading Anne Frank's story, so the story left its mark. Now it happened that one of the diary writing girls lived in a house which was occupied by the Israeli army during the siege of the Church of Nativity in April 2002. Her house oversaw Babel Nativity Square in Bethlehem. The family was forced to live in one room. They even had to get permission to go to the toilet located on the same floor. As I understood it, the girl, like her classmates, continued in their diary writing, in fact as an act of sumud under such circumstances. At one point, she went to the Israeli soldier in the corridor to ask her for permission to go to the toilet. And she asked him, "Do you know the story of Anne Frank?" Of course, the soldier said and added, "Do you want to read it?" "No," said the girl, "I read it, but I want you to read it." A very challenging remark. Indeed, once again, an act of sumud. As for me, after learning about that moment, I started to become myself interested in Anne Frank's story. And now I offer it to my daughter as a kind of Dutch-Palestinian story for a Dutch-Palestinian child. Yes, right now, there is a visual widely circulating in Holland with Anne Frank wearing a keffiyeh. Yes, there are protests. I feel that they are a bit obligatory and ritual. But the main point is that it is interesting to see how the Anne Frank story can unexpectedly connect with other stories, a traveling symbolic story. I think that this traveling of symbols and also of sumud is educationally very helpful to see that staying sumud is a worldwide phenomenon and how stories of sumud can create this sensation of recognition even though contexts and cultures may be very different. Thank you.